This is Frankly MSP, where managed service providers get real.
Hey, and welcome to episode 20 of Frankly MSP, the podcast for managed service providers who want to boost their productivity, efficiency, and profitability. I'm your host, Jennifer Tribe. In episode 12 of Frankly MSP, I spoke to MSP Josh Weiss. Josh owns LA Creative Technologies based in Los Angeles, and he chatted with me about how to move your relationship with a client from a technical level where they see you as the technical doer, the technical order taker and fixer, to more of a consultative partnership where you're able to provide advice and proactive management. It was a great episode, and if you haven't listened to it yet, I encourage you to go back and check it out. Now, I'm going to be talking to Josh again today. At LA Creative, Josh and his team are 100% focused on managed services and project work, but it hasn't always been that way. In fact, when Josh started out his company, as he tells us today, he was doing anything technical you needed him to do. He was editing podcasts and supporting home computers and doing a hodgepodge of break fix, just all sorts of stuff. And it's really only in the last 3 years that he's made the switch to a professional managed services model. Now in 2018, his MSP is thriving. In fact, Josh more than doubled his revenue last year, and he's on track for significant growth again this year. As well, he's greatly improved his work-life balance, as we'll hear, and all this with a team of only 3 people, himself included. We'll learn more about Josh's journey and some of the keys to his success in our interview today. But first, we turn to Richard Tubb and Karl Palachuk to take a look at what's going on in the world through an MSP lens.
You're listening to Frankly MSP, brought to you by Avik Networks.
Hi folks, Richard Tubb back again, and I'm joined today by my good friend and MSP expert, Karl Palachuk. How are you doing today, Karl?
Very good. Enjoying my super summer weather here.
And you're home in Sacramento, California?
Yes, indeed.
Well, this is unusual. I'm at home in the Newcastle upon Tyne, in the northeast of the UK. It's quite unusual to find both of us at home at the same time nowadays, isn't it?
It is, but I'll be here another 6 weeks or so before I hit the road again.
I wanted to jump into something that's caused quite a bit of chatter over the past week or so, something that's caught my eye. Venture capitalist Mary Meeker of Kleiner Perkins Partners has just released the 2018 version of her famous Internet Trends report. Now, it's a 294-page report, absolutely packed. I would love to say that I've been through it all, Karl. I'll be lying. I've glossed through it. And to be honest, there's a ton of information that's going to be relevant to managed service providers. So what I thought I'd do, we'll have a look at some of the specifics. So if I kick things off, one of the big things that came out of it that I think is relevant to managed service providers is internet adoption. As of 2018, the report tells us that half of the world's population, so that's about 3.6 billion people, are now actively on the internet. And the report goes on to tell us that's in a large part due to cheaper Android smartphone handsets and Wi-Fi becoming more available.
And electricity. I've only read the summary of the report. I haven't read the whole thing myself, but electricity is a huge piece of that. And with the growth of solar worldwide, electricity is going to be one of the things that's going to change our world.
It is, and we've touched upon this before, the absolute need for electricity. In fact, we touched upon it in our last What's Going On segment. You don't get very far without electricity nowadays.
Well, then we take for granted because our societies have had it for so long, but not all the rest of the world.
Talking of the rest of the world, mobile usage was something that really jumped out at me here. While smartphone shipments aren't actually increasing and internet user growth is actually slowing, despite so many people being online, the report tells us that US adults are spending more time online thanks to mobile than ever before. Now, get this, Karl, people are spending on average 5.9 hours per day in 2017 on mobile versus 5.6 hours in 2016. That's a lot of hours in a day, isn't it?
I would say it's actually a problem. One of the things that's happened is we fill every gap of our life by looking at our phone, watching a little video, catching up on the news. People aren't used to just sitting and watching the world around them for 3 minutes.
I absolutely agree. And I saw a fantastic quote this morning. I couldn't find the source of it, but it was basically saying if you've picked up your phone and they're now wondering what it was you picked it up to do with the phone, try putting the phone back down again. That's a very bad paraphrase of that quote, but it's true, isn't it? You see so many people mindlessly swiping nowadays.
We travel a lot, so you see it in airports all the time. People can't accept the idea that they might get bored, and so they pick up their phone.
It struck a chord for me. So when I was reading this report and I saw that statistic, I thought, I don't think I spend that much time on my mobile device. But what I've done is I'm an Android user. I've gone and grabbed an app called App Usage. For the last week or so, it's been charting how many times I use the phone during the day. In other words, how many times I pick it up, what I'm using on it. So that's going to be interesting. Perhaps we'll come back to that in a future episode just to see how much I use my mobile, my smartphone in comparison to everyone else.
Maybe we should both get this app and then just compare them. I tend to leave my phone face down in another room for hours at a time. And it irritates some people because they want to call me or text me and they think I'm ignoring them, but I'm really ignoring everybody.
I won't take offense. So moving on with this report, I think this is very relevant to managed service providers, certainly the sales and marketing function. Mary Meeker's report tells us that people are shifting their time to mobile faster than mobile ad spending is following. So that tells me that if you don't have mobile ads in your portfolio of getting your MSP's name out there, now's the time to seriously consider it because it seems to be well behind the curve at the moment. Now, one part of the report that's not going to come as a surprise to you and I, in fact, we're not the type of guys to say, we told you so, but we told you so, and that's voice. Voice technology is at an inflection point due to speech recognition hitting 95% accuracy, the report tells us. And actually, the sales explosion for Amazon Echo and our friend Alexa went from over 10 million to 30 million sold in total by the end of 2017. We've touched on this a lot during this podcast, but voice is a huge part of technology going forward.
And it will be for our industry a great deal because as we move forward, more and more of what customers are going to want is how do I fine tune this? How do I make this work? And when you've got everything in your office listening to you, you really do have to address that. And who's going to address it but the IT guy?
And talking of the IT guy, another stat that jumped out from this Kleiner Perkins Partners report was freelancing. This will come as no surprise to people who are keeping their finger on the pulse, but employees crave scheduling and work from home flexibility more than anything else now. Freelance work actually grew at 3 times faster than the total workforce growth. So I think there's a lesson in there, not just for MSP owners, but for every business owner, isn't there, Karl, about how we look to engage employees going forward?
Yes, absolutely. And all of the stuff around that, because there's an entire economy of supporting those home businesses and stay-at-home gig workers, the gig economy, they call it.
Absolutely. So and that's one I think I'd like for us to touch on in a future podcast. The big one coming out for me, though, if you're an MSP, the great news is tech investment is at an all-time high. In fact, the top 6 public R&D and CapEx spenders are all technology companies. So it's never been a better time to be working in the tech space. And interestingly, it's not perhaps the time and the place to get political about this, but the current climate disagrees with what this report says about immigration. It's absolutely critical to a strong economy, the report says. And 56% of the top US companies were founded by a first or second generation immigrant.
And, Silicon Valley is just completely run by people who are first and second generation immigrants.
Well, at the danger of getting into a political debate, we won't touch too heavily on that one. But if you've not heard of Mary Meeker or her annual report before now, I'd encourage you to check it out. But I'd also say you're not alone. I certainly wasn't aware of it until my dev Ahmed pointed it out to me. So I'll definitely be keeping an eye on this in future years as it's a really well thought of resource. And just before we came on air, Karl, you were telling me you'd not come across this report either.
No, I'd never heard of it.
3 other stats I just want to jump into. Obviously, this is a 295-page report. It's absolutely packed. We could spend the whole podcast talking about it, but just 3 small things that I just want to finish up on. First of all, crypto. cryptocurrency has absolutely exploded. Coinbase's user account has nearly quadrupled since January 2017. So that's really up there. Something we've touched upon before on this podcast, subscription services, Karl. They're now seeing absolutely massive adoption. So the likes of Netflix is up 25%. The New York Times is up 43%, and Spotify is up 48% year on year in 2017. And finally, one that's very interesting, I think, transportation. So the report tells us that people are actually buying fewer cars, keeping them for longer, and really interestingly, are shifting their transportation spend to ride-share apps such as Uber, which almost doubled in 2017.
That's amazing.
It is amazing, and it leads us into something that you told me just before we came on air that I'd really like to cover. It's a news story that you noticed in Ars Technica this week.
A couple of days ago, there was an article about Waymo, which is Google's answer to the driverless car. Waymo has agreed to buy 62,000 minivans from Fiat Chrysler.
Wow.
Now, the way that Waymo works is different than Tesla or the other people who are trying to develop driverless cars. What Google's doing is building basically retrofits. They will turn any car into a driverless car, and they are probably not quite a generation ahead of everybody else. You know, Uber had this accident in March, and my understanding is that the pedestrian was at fault, but the pedestrian died.
Mm-hmm. And I think somebody was killed in, was it a Tesla accident earlier this year as well, the self-driving car, which was, and the car was in total self-driving mode. So.
Right. You can argue about who is at fault and whatever, but driverless cars are not going to eliminate people getting killed in accidents. That's never been a legitimate goal. The question is, can we make them safer overall if we eliminate drivers? I think the answer is yes. Virtually every auto accident is the fault of the driver, of one or more drivers, if you think of it in those terms. But I find it more interesting to think about how fast this technology is coming, because there's a lot of people who say, oh, no, 5 years, 10 years down the road. But realistically, you're not going to buy 62,000 vehicles for testing purposes.
No, this is not a publicity stunt.
They are going to be putting these on the road this year. And by this year, I mean, you know, this year's half over with almost. So it is very realistic that these are going to be out there, and they will be a service. There's no reason for you to own one of these, right? If you think about it, I think the statistic on how much the average person uses their car, at least in the US, is about 6% of the time. It sleeps in the garage most of the time, certainly all night, but also most of the day, or it's at an office during the day or whatever. But in terms of how much you actually use it, it's a massive waste of energy and money. You pay for your insurance all night, every night while it's sleeping. So that's 30% of its life. Having a service where you say, I'm going to pay a subscription and a car just shows up at my door and takes me where I want to go. The information that you just gave about that industry almost doubling last year, imagine how quickly it will grow when it's driverless.
Exactly. It's crazy. Yeah.
Waymo had an interesting story like 3 years ago. They put a blind man into an unaccompanied driverless car and sent him through the middle of Austin, Texas, without incident. Now, that was 3 years ago. And right now, some of the competitors are not really ready to even do that today. Waymo is far, far ahead of the game. But kind of related to that is that Softbank, which is a Japanese investment firm, is going to invest, they announced last week, $2.2 billion in General Motors' driverless technology division. As I say, it's coming, and it's coming a lot faster than a lot of people believe.
I think we're in a bit of a slump. People are being very negative at the moment. It goes in peaks and troughs, these technology adoption and excitement. Initially, if we'd have talked about this maybe 12 months ago, people were super excited about driverless cars. Now we're reaching the stage where barely a week goes by where there's not some sort of negative story about Tesla or Uber or Ford. But people mostly ignore the fact that Google or Waymo, as we have been talking about, they've been working on this way longer than anyone else. And she said it was that a blind man taking an unaccompanied test drive in Austin. That took place in October 2015. We're almost 3 years on from that. Yeah, so Google, Waymo are really at the cutting edge here and probably way ahead of their competitors.
Oh, yes. They're by far the furthest along. This ties into everything else that we discuss on a perennial basis. There's no better example of big data today than the billions of IOs that it takes to manage a driverless car in a complex environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's going to be a big discussion about, we've already got 4G, but what does 5G look like? Because that's going to be needed in cities to cover the amount of bandwidth that's needed for all of this additional data from driverless cars. So it really is a fundamental change, isn't it?
As I said, it's everywhere.
So that's what's been going on. If you want to check out venture capitalist Mary Meeker's report, we shall include that in the show notes, along with a link to that Ars Technica article that Karl talked about there. Karl, thanks for joining us, and I'll look forward to speaking to you again in a couple of weeks' time.
Very good. Thank you, sir.
Cheers.
You're listening to Frankly MSP.
As always, I'll put links to the resources Karl and Richard discuss in today's show notes at auvik.com/franklymsp/020. Now we come to my interview with Josh Weiss of LA Creative Technologies. As I mentioned in episode 12, Josh is a fascinating guy. He lived in Guatemala for a year. He's an MSP, but he moonlights as a DJ. You can hear some of his mixes on SoundCloud, actually. And in general, he's a really interesting person to talk to. I think you'll enjoy this story of how he started his business and the twists and turns that have brought him to the success he enjoys today. Let's have a listen. Hi, Josh. Welcome back to Frankly MSP.
Jennifer, it's so great to be back. Thank you.
Yeah, and I say welcome back, of course, because you've been on Frankly MSP before. We spoke a number of episodes ago about moving the conversation with a client from a technical level to a business level, and there was lots of great info in there. While you and I were setting up that first interview and chatting about the topic, your business story came out, and I thought it was a very interesting story and one that a lot of our listeners might find very helpful to hear. So I've brought you back to give us the case study, if you will, of LA Creative Technologies, which is your MSP.
That sounds like a fun story to tell.
Yeah. So take us back to 2008. Tell us about this brand new business you had just started.
2008. Let's see. I was 27, I believe. About a year earlier, I had quit my job working at a nonprofit radio station in the Bay Area. I was working for a NPR affiliate radio station doing some tech and media work. I quit that job. I went and I lived in Guatemala for a year where I got fluent in Spanish and helped build some computer labs and also really explored my other passion besides technology of music. And I was DJing a lot there. And so I came back to Los Angeles in 27. I had no savings. I was living at my mom's house and I printed up some flyers. I got a little clip art in Word and I printed up some flyers that I could help you with whatever computer woes you had at your home. And so I started building the business. It was called Josh Weiss Consulting. And I was doing that along with also trying to make WordPress sites and editing audio for people and setting up podcasts and whatever else I could do to make ends meet. So really the business started as I know how to do something that pays decent hourly. I was just going to people's homes and that kind of progressed into working with people who lived in slightly bigger homes who could pay a little better and met a couple businesses, started working for businesses, and slowly over the course of those years, just learned more and more about the MSP market and how to do this in a sustainable way and to actually get a little bit of time for myself every now and then.
So when did you change the name to LA Creative?
LA Creative Technologies, I would say that is a 2012 decision that happened right around the same time that we started to make a real commitment to transform to MSP.
So at that time, then I know you've told me one-man shop, 100% on break fix and project work.
Yeah, so that would be about three and a half years ago. I'm sorry, I said 2012. I actually meant 2015. So if we transition to about three and a half years ago, that's where the change to LA Creative came. And that is when we decided to hire C-level consulting. And I called up Rex Frank, who I know has been on your podcast show as well. And that was really that moment of commitment for me to say, you know what, I am going to get on these twice a week calls with a executive coach who understands ConnectWise, who understands the MSP industry, who can help me design agreements that will keep clients happy and will also be profitable, and who can help me really learn to evaluate my vendors and to get my vendors in check. And to really, the idea that we always had was to build a very automated, very outsourced MSP that also delivered an incredibly high level of account management and service to our clients. The critical pieces to that was working with a firm that really understood ConnectWise and could help keep the processes in check and make sure that we were monitoring the finances. And it was also exploring the relationship that we have formed with Continuum to serve as our help desk. And so in those 3 years, not only have we learned to work very tightly with an outsourced knock and help desk, but I'm also one of the 10 members of their partner advisory council. So I've been really excited to learn to work with this outsourcing context and also to help influence the decision that help desk actually takes.
And a quick sketch. So tell us about LA Creative today.
LA Creative Technologies today, we are growing very, very rapidly. There is now myself in the executive and virtual CIO role. We have a project technician, project manager, and we have an account manager / sales manager who's helping to bring in new clients. We grew our income about 2.5x last year. We are 100% managed services and fixed fee project work. We no longer have scattered professional services relationships because we learned that they don't serve ourselves or our clients. And we have very, very solidly established ourselves into our niche, which is working with innovative, creative companies, people who are really pushing boundaries in their fields, whether it's the agency real estate, who is one of the most rapidly growing real estate companies in the entire country, who we've helped build about 10 offices last year and helped them expand their franchises, or we have clients who are doing motion graphics in the video game industry and working with all the top video games out there. Everyone that we work with really is in our niche and works within the business model that works for us and is really committed to leveraging technology to grow their businesses.
So that is quite a transformation. If we look back, 2008, it was kind of catch as catch can, any kind of technology work you could do. 2015, so 7 years later now, making the decision to commit to managed services. And now 2018, just 3 short years later, having made that total transition. So there's kind of 2 phases there. What was going on in that 2008 to 2015, that 7-year period where you hadn't yet made the decision to move to managed services? What was going on with you?
There was a lot of finding myself going on, trying to decide if IT was really what I was going to dedicate myself to, doing a fair amount of starting to learn about business. Like at first, it was just sort of a means to an end. And what I never expected is that I would really fall in love with the business aspects and the process aspects of what was going on. So it took me a couple of years to get to where actually all my income was coming from IT. And then there was a couple of years of really learning the industry and building a reputation, I would say, and deciding to really commit myself to living in Los Angeles, which was kind of a question for me for a while. So there was sort of that initial phase from 08 to 2012. And then there was 2012 to 2015 where I really built a solid, here's an IT practice that works, even if it's not sustainable. Then there was the processes that we're talking about now. And so I would say at that point, it was really a couple things. It was people on the Yahoo SMB managed services message board, which has been around forever, run by Amy Luby. And there was some people there like Raj Goel in New York at BrainLink, and my friend Noam up in the Bay Area who runs Ignite IT, like a couple of these people that I just found on the internet who are so ready and willing to share their knowledge with me. And then there was this component of finding a company in C-level consulting. And also I worked with Manuel Palchuk, Karl Palchuk's brother. Between the two of them, I went from sort of managing myself to essentially having a manager and someone to help keep me on track week after week after week after week to evaluate what I'm doing and make sure that the things that I'm doing are the best practices. And then, of course, there's a long adherence to writing process, writing down what we did, moving from having things in Dropbox folders to having things in LastPass to keeping things in IT glue and slowly just building out the procedures week after week, day after day. It's taken all of that to get to a place where we can successfully leverage outsourcing and also get our work done in a way that makes sense.
So I know you talk a lot about 3 pillars: people, process, technology.
Yeah.
Where does the coaching fall into that? Is that above that and helping you with those 3 things, or is it one of those segments?
And I would almost say that the coaching falls in our Venn diagram. It falls in a combination of people and process, because so much of the process that we leverage in our company was really started as processes that were suggested by the coaches. At the same time, the coaches are those people. I mean, essentially, I see my coaching team as being members of the executive team of LA Creative Tech. Our company could not have grown like this without those people really taking what almost feels like an ownership stake in the company. If you can establish those types of relationships with your mentors where they are genuinely week after week, day after day, concerned and involved with your success, then you have helped to create that first people component of a company. As a one-person company who has a very strong relationship with an executive coach, that person is an inseparable part of your team. Does that make sense?
It does. What would you say to people who are perhaps in a position, they're in a break-fix business right now, their margins are not great, so they're like, I can't afford coaching right now. How do I get myself out of this trap where I need it, but I can't afford it because I need it to tell me how not to do this?
There's 2 interesting things. I mean, the reason that I can afford coaching is because in that 2012 to 2015 time, I took on so many clients and took on so much business that I was working 15 hours a day doing professional services break fix work that I actually finally got some reserves in the bank to be able to hire a coach. So one answer to that is just keep going. And I've had to learn to say no to work now, but for a while you just say yes to work and you just try things and you just take on projects that will help you. But the other thing, you've got guys like Karl who are offering 5-week courses for $200, or, you've got a guy like Nigel Moore. You can join his tribe is super cheap. You can join that every month, and he's got loads of process, and he'll get on a call with you and coach you. Think about the cheaper levels of service that are available out there, where you have people that can keep you accountable and who do have the same kind of knowledge that a coach has. And even if they're not going to get on 2 hours of calls with you every week, they're there and they're there to help you. I said to you in our last podcast that the main advice for really learning to be a consultant instead of a technician is to ask questions. I think that the main advice I have for someone who's trying to make this transition from break fix to MSP is use the resources that are out there and don't be afraid to ask for help. One thing about our industry that I'm sure other industries have this too, with the people who are genuinely passionate about it, but people who are out there on forums and the people who make posts and the people who run companies, they like helping people. I've shared my MSP contract with probably a dozen people who have asked me on the internet. I've shared pricing practices and I share marketing with so many people that I know. If you see yourself as part of a community and not as part of this huge competitive landscape, you have so much to learn from your peers. If you're not someone who asks for help, you'd be shocked how many people out there would be happy to help.
That's great advice. I remember years ago when I was getting into communications, I had a mentor who said, I could compete with you, but I'm going to help you instead because there's more than enough business for all of us. And the more we help each other, the more we get out of it. And that has been so true. I have followed his advice and it sounds like it's great advice for MSPs as well.
It's really amazing. It kind of blew me away, but it's funny, even if I think about just random advice I've gotten from it was my stepfather who first inspired me to always keep good track of finances, always sign contracts, and don't mess around with the IRS. Part of it is just listening to what the people who aren't even in a formal mentorship capacity can provide to you. But in response to what you just said, I work in creative fields. I work in creative industries with LA Creative. We have our own niche. So I'm not competing with the big mega MSPs out there because they're not selling to my people. If I have a colleague in Los Angeles who's selling to medical clinics and insurance companies, we can be colleagues. We don't have to be competing with each other. And so that, it's part of the importance of having your niche really, really well defined. I have a niche that really almost no one else in the MSP industry has. So the whole industry are my colleagues, not my competitors.
That's awesome. So we talked a lot about coaching, about mentorship, about attitude, finding information where you can. Anything else that you think was really integral to your transformation from break fix to MSP?
If people and process was where the Venn diagram integrated for coaching, we could almost say people, process, and technology come together for learning to successfully leverage outsourcing, because that was the other piece of it. We were able to grow so rapidly because rather than having to add a help desk technician every time we added XYZ clients, we used the Continuum help desk. And to really leverage the Continuum help desk effectively, it was a combination of, on the people side, learning how to give instructions and really work with a team that's in some combination of Pittsburgh and Mumbai to pass documentation and process back and forth rapidly, constantly revising our process documentation so that what we were providing to people who don't know us and don't know our clients necessarily at first, they know how to work with these companies in the most comfortable way. And it was also a combination of technology in terms of setting up phone trees right, so we always get our escalations, and setting up ConnectWise so that if a ticket ever gets lost somewhere in their system, that we catch it right away, and setting up automation inside of our own business. Because you can't run a business that's growing 2.5x with only 2 employees if you don't have a pretty solid grasp on your process and your technology. And if both your outsourced and your internal people don't have a genuine passion for what they're doing and really care about the mission. All those things come together, people, process, and technology, to allow one to create an outsourcing strategy, creating a business which can both heavily leverage outsourcing and also have clients feel like they are always taken care of by the account management and higher level technical team.
That's great advice, Josh. All of this has been very helpful. I'm going to put your contact info in today's show notes, and if people want to reach out to you, they can.
Yeah, of course. Everything I said about reaching out for help definitely applies to me. It's really something that I'm passionate about.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Absolutely, Jennifer. Thank you.
That was Josh Weiss, CEO of LA Creative Technologies. This interview was all about not being afraid to ask for help and advice from your peers. So by all means, get in touch with Josh if you're interested. I'll be sure to put his contact info in today's show notes at avik.com/franklymsp/020. And that's a wrap. If you enjoyed today's show, please help spread the word by leaving us a review on iTunes or posting about us on social media using hashtag FranklyMSP. Till next time, this is Jennifer Tribe. Thanks for listening.
Frankly MSP, brought to you by Avik Networks, the most efficient and profitable way to manage your clients' networks.